Hey guys, welcome back to the Grow IT podcast. Your host here, Alessandro Coutri. We'll be diving into a great story today. We have Ryan Shea with us. We'll be diving into a little bit about his story, really how he got into this space and some engaging insights into the industry. So make sure to stick around. But without further ado, I'll just go ahead and kick it off to you, Ryan, if you don't mind just giving us a quick introduction and telling us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Ryan Shea. I'm the managing director at Public. We are a public sector innovation partner. So we work primarily with UK central government, although increasingly with local government, international governments. We do a little bit of work with the European Commission and increasingly the private sector. So we've done some work with companies like Airbnb, MasterCard, but all at sort of the intersection of technology innovation and public sector problems. And a little bit about how I got into this space. So I spent the first 5 years of my career in strategy consulting, working primarily with federal government clients. So I live in London. My company's in the UK, but originally from East Coast of the US. And I found myself in my very first paid job, professional paid job, running a testing team at the IRS when Obamacare was going live, which was not at all where I thought my career was going to be going. I studied liberal arts. And within 6 months into the job, I was leading two of the test teams, testing two of the critical systems involved in the rollout of Obamacare, the premium tax credit system, so the system that determined how much premium tax credit you got as part of the act, and then the income and family size verification system. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed working on seeing a piece of policy turn into a living, breathing system.
Yeah.
I loved working with technical teams. Testing was a really great way to get into a more technical career.
What was it? I'm curious. Like, what was it about, like the technical side of things that was just like very fascinating to you?
Super logical, being able to look at um, a user flow and then translate that into XML code that we then would use to test the system. So I love the logical element of it, but also as someone who was a little bit more big picture, I really enjoyed seeing how um, the direction of travel of a piece of legislation was then manifesting itself into the design of a system. So you get to see sort of all aspects of the problem, from what are we trying to achieve with the legislation all the way through to design and very technical features that are chosen by the developers and the system designers and the architects. So I love seeing big picture turn into a living, breathing thing. I love the logical nature of it. It was like a puzzle that we are trying to figure out. And in the case of a tester, you're figuring out how to break it. So that's also kind of a fun task.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And you've obviously been in the industry now for a little bit, right? And you've probably seen some ebbs and flows. Like, what are you currently noticing in terms of certain trends that are maybe coming up in the market right now?
So for our business, we work at that intersection of innovation and public sector, which is not traditionally been an enormous space. Generally, public sector is dominated by large businesses. There's good reasons for that, risk aversion, but also just the time to market is quite onerous in public sector, and that favors larger, better capitalized businesses. What, at least within the UK, we're seeing a bit more appetite for a different kind of supplier, one that can leverage not just their own internal skills, but also what the market has to offer. So, in our kind of view of the world, we're seeing a bit more diversity being introduced to public sector supply chains, more appetite to work with a differentiated type of business. And I think that's really positive. That's the kind of change that we got into this business to try to affect. So I'm very excited about that. At kind of, more micro levels, putting my old testing hat back on, some of the developments in DevOps are really incredible. I mean, things that I was doing 10 years ago are now not done by people. And I think that will increasingly become the case through a lot of the software development lifecycle. There will obviously still be a need for people in the loop, but so many of the things that would have been done by a human in a previous SDLC are probably going to be done by AI. I think that's really interesting and potentially, for looking at us where we're looking at government, potentially huge because oftentimes the barrier to entry is cost. So being able to build functionality, in particular functionality that's geared towards a citizen-centric experience, that's always been the dream of government, is to be able to build services that can adapt to individuals and citizens in the way that private sector has. I think what the advent of, in particular, generative AI allows for is the lowering of the cost of that
Hmm.
personalization. So that's something in particular that we're really excited about. So, kind of in summary, we're pushing for greater diversification in government supply chains. We're starting to see more of that across the board, greater personalization of services for citizens. And then I think on the tooling side, we're going to see a real step change in the way in which tools are developed and used throughout the software development lifecycle.
Yeah, I think there's some great points that you bring up, and I did want to touch on a little bit about because you're obviously talking about public and kind of what you guys really do as an organization, and kind of what you bring to the table. I'm curious, to maybe hear it from you, right? Like, what is it that you would say, like maybe your unique selling proposition really is as an organization, or where do you feel like maybe you guys stand out amongst maybe your competitors?
Well, when we started life in 2017, we looked at other technology, more mature technology verticals, and tried to envisage a world in which the best in tech could be applied to public sector problems. So, what was it about fintech? For forever, financial services was filled with legacy solutions, legacy infrastructure. What was it that allowed that switch to happen? And what happened was there was an ecosystem of solution providers, funders, industry groups that stepped in to create the fintech industry. And so when we started out on our journey, we asked the question, well, what would do this in public sector? And so in 2017, we launched Europe's first government technology accelerator program, which was called GovStart. And that garnered a ton of attention from UK government and across European government. So I think one thing that really sets us apart as a business is that grounding in the ecosystem. We have been supporting, not just building tech ourselves, but supporting companies that want to serve UK, European, NATO, public sector for the last 7 years. So I think that's one element of us that's quite unique, is that we look out to the market rather than offering to do everything ourselves. I think that's also given us a unique perspective into certain policy areas that government really cares about. So we've done quite a bit of work with UK government around the online safety bill. We're currently doing quite a bit around planning reform, which probably is a little bit less of a focus area for some of your American listeners. But in the UK, the process of building houses, building any sort of physical infrastructure, built environment is incredibly onerous. And so what's been great is that our business has been brought into those policy areas to advise. So not just looking at technology solutions, but what can those
Yeah.
technology solutions enable? Um, I think that's another thing that makes us quite unique, is that we're quite policy grounded, in addition to being technically literate. And the bridge of those two things puts us in a unique position to help our clients.
Yeah, and definitely, and especially the way that you phrased it, right? And I'm curious, you as obviously the managing director, right? Like driving things forward. Like, what do you kind of task? I'm sure you wear multiple hats, right? Like, it's not just one or the other. But what are you typically driving forward on the day to day?
I look quite a bit at sales and business development. So making sure that lead generation is strong, having conversations with our clients, getting a feel for what the market cares about, especially when your primary client base is government. You're always at the kind of intersection of what is on policymakers' lips, what's on
Yeah.
politicians' lips. That's ultimately going to translate into the priorities that funnel through the system. So it's very important to be close to the pulse of what's happening in the market, both from a policy perspective, but then also from a technology perspective. So a lot of my day is speaking externally to, decision makers, clients, other companies that we may want to partner with. So there's a relationship aspect to the job that I think is quite important. Um, but equally, your job is to run the business, and so just as important, if not more important, is making sure that my business unit leaders are set up for success, that our teams have the right tooling, culture, skills. So being able to look internally and quickly diagnose, okay, what does a team need? How can I be helpful? So I see my role as being an enabler internally, being able to go into teams and say, all right, what tweak or shift or addition or subtraction is going to make this team function better. So I see it as kind of, we use the term player coach. So being capable of doing delivery for our clients, generating value, but also enabling others to generate value for the business, and that's ultimately how we scale.
Yeah, and it's almost needed, right? It's almost needed in a managing director, obviously someone that's driving the business forward, to be able to kind of have those different aspects that they can pull out at any time, right? Like if you got to get into your hands dirty in the delivery, you can probably do that. Obviously the sales side of things, you're moving that forward, and obviously we're always curious to kind of understand, like, what is it that's maybe, what have you found that's worked well on the business development side of things, for yourself, and maybe throughout your career, maybe over here. I'm just curious to kind of pick your brain on that.
So I really harken back to the insight that we had as a business when we looked at those more mature technology verticals, and then looked at our own market and said, what's missing? So in the case of public sector, events were missing. The kinds of companies that we wanted, and solutions that we wanted working with government, didn't have an access point. There weren't co-working spaces for the kinds of companies we wanted to see break into government, located alongside where government typically hangs out in this country. And it's even more pronounced in the US. Tech is a huge generalization, but you know, tech is largely in California, finance is in New York, government is in DC. These are not necessarily concentric circles in the way that they need to be. So one thing that we did that was really helpful for our growth was try to fill those gaps. So we launched an event known as the GovTech Summit, and we partnered with Emmanuel Macron's office to throw the event. But the intention was to bring together policymakers, civil servants, um, investors, startups, get these people into a room who don't typically interact with one another. And being at the epicenter of that allowed us to see business development opportunities in a way that we otherwise would have been competing in a very crowded space.
Yeah.
So my advice there is probably twofold. One is look at what's working well in other markets that might be more mature than your own, and see how you can replicate that in your own market. And then also be a broker of ideas. So if you are at the epicenter of um, thoughts and ideas and people who don't normally talk to one another, you're by definition valuable. So I would encourage people in positions similar to my own to really keep kind of diverse sets of contacts that you speak to,
Yeah.
because it'll allow you to see things and to suggest things, which inevitably puts you in a better position from a sales perspective.
Definitely. And I think that that's a great perspective to have, right? Is just leaning on your, obviously your network, but also to your point, understanding the name of the game that you're in, right? And that's the relationship game, right? And so obviously putting on those events or just prioritizing those relationships, right? And building them, that's what ultimately is going to bring business to the company, right? That's ultimately what's going to cultivate growth, right? It's when you're prioritizing those relationships and making an effort to make them, and that's when you start to see that growth. And it's especially within the industry that you're in, it's relationship dependent, right? It's not just one decision maker that has to sign off. It's not like you're selling peanuts, right? These are larger deals. There's multiple decision makers that have to be involved. There's legal, procurement. There's different departments that have to sign off. So it's all built upon that relationship that they can trust. Obviously, what you guys can deliver upon, right?
Totally. And we're in a very regulated market as well. So you can't get around bidding. Bidding is a huge part of what we do. I'm sure some of your listeners are also in regulated markets where, very long sales cycles. You got to be able to handle that,
Yeah.
and take it seriously. But absolutely, I mean, at the end of the day, this is, if you're in the advisory space, it's a reputation business. So hence why, we take what we do quite seriously. I take the trust that government in particular puts in our business very, very seriously. So we have 100%.
Yeah. Now, if other, managing directors are maybe listening in and maybe they're earlier on in their career, or people just, maybe wanting to scale up to the C-suite, position inside of an organization or just be one of the leaders in an organization. What type of mindset would you say is really needed to be, a successful, managing director of a company?
I think that you need to be driven by things that are bigger than yourself. So I think for me, what I found, I ultimately got into this space because I saw firsthand the extent to which government didn't have the technology tools that it needed to be successful. I go back to that original experience that I had at the IRS, seeing my clients not have the tooling that they need to do things that we would take for granted in our daily lives. I felt like was, you know what, this is a really big problem. It costs society a lot of money. It's miserable for these people to have to work with suboptimal tooling. And when thinking about where I wanted to make a bet, and spend my career, this felt like a cause that I could, devote myself to in a way that, just simply making money, it was going to fulfill me more than that. So I would say advice point number one would be find a cause that you can really, get out of bed for. And
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be saving the world, right? Like it could be something, relatively mundane, but if you find a meaning in it, you're going to be able to devote yourself to it. Listen to the extra podcast on your run related to your market, read the extra article because it's not a chore for you. You're intrinsically interested and motivated by the space. So I would say that's one thing that I've thought quite a bit about. And then, secondly, now that our business has grown to being, solidly a middle-sized business employing 50 people, um, really taking an interest in what you're building for the people around you. I think it's quite hard to do this job if you don't care about people. I think it's hard to do it for your clients, and I think it's hard to do it for your staff, and ultimately that comes through. So I think having a genuine interest in people and care for the people around you, it's an enormous privilege to get to run a business. Um, and taking that seriously, I think is very important to having success in a role like this. Would be, yeah, I think those would be my starting points.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important, right? I think there's a quote that says, the man who enjoys walking will always walk more than the man who just walks just to get to a destination, right? Like something along the line. I may have butchered it, but essentially, to your point, where it's like, if you're truly passionate about something, or you truly want to excel in a category, and that's all you think about, right? And you're just always obsessing over, how can you obtain more and more knowledge within that domain. you're gonna find yourself very soon passing up all those other people who are just doing the normal kind of 9 to 5 type of clock in and clock out, right? When you're constantly trying to reiterate, and that's not to say that you shouldn't have a life outside of work. I'm not saying that, but there's times obviously where less balance is probably going to be more beneficial towards you, right? And that's something that I've always thought about in my career, where it's like, hey, how can I just get his head as much as possible, learn, really dive deep into this to become an expert, right? Where you're then able to, be that valuable person within that room, right? And people are able to kind of, trust your opinion because you've done that actual homework. You actually understand your industry, you understand exactly the mechanisms within it, and you're perceived as a higher value. You're more valuable to that person you're speaking to, right? So I love that you bring that up. I think it's an important, thing that people should be doing at every position, right? If you're trying to excel, if you're trying to get to the next, even if you're trying to be a successful leader, it's like you have to continuously be pushing the envelope of how can I be better, how can I learn more, and what is it that I can improve on, right?
I was watching and I am not a Ohio State Buckeyes fan. I'll declare that.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully, none of your Ohio listeners are offended by that. But Urban Meyer made a very interesting comment. I was watching some clips of embedded film crew with the Buckeyes, and Urban Meyer made a very interesting quote or line to his team, which has always stuck with me, which is, if you want to impress somebody here, you need to go +2, which means finish your drills, do everything that everyone's asked of you today, and then find 2 ways in the course of your day to go above and beyond what's been asked of you. And I think that's a really measurable way of assessing whether you've done what you needed to do. It's very easy to, especially in a position like mine where you could theoretically work all day and probably not cross off all the things that you wanted to do. But especially for people starting out their career, I think that's a really good mnemonic for thinking about, am I doing a good job? And you won't be able to go +2 every day,
Yeah,
but holding yourself to that. All right, that's what I'm aiming for.
the
I'm aiming
standard.
for, do what's put on my plate well, and then find 2 ways in the course of my day to go above and beyond. To me, was, especially as I was coming up through the ranks, was a very valuable way of holding myself to account that, all right, I've had a good day. I've done, you know, I've achieved at the level that I want to achieve. It was very measurable. It was very tangible. So I've always liked that.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's funny that you say that. We do a similar exercise in our company, which is top twos, which is not exactly the same as what you're obviously referring to, but it's more intention based, right? Where it's like, how can you set your intention on the top two things that you need to be driving forward every single day? To either excel within your role, or for obviously like myself and my partners is like, what can we be doing every single day to make sure that we're driving the business forward, right? So it's those practices that you kind of set the intention, and that'll excel you as well, and then going above and beyond that, right? That's what you're gonna have to do to win, right? To excel, you have to do more than the average, right? What average people are doing, you're gonna have to go above and beyond that to be in that top 10%, 5%, 1%, right? Now, you've obviously shared a couple of nuggets of wisdom throughout this podcast, Ryan, and I do appreciate that. I appreciate you coming on over here. One of the final questions that I typically like to end with, and it's more of a loaded one. I don't know if there's anything else you can pull out, but you've already sprinkled some. But what would you say are like one of the most, one or two of most important things that you've learned throughout your career that you'd really, be willing to share with the audience?
Yeah, I've given you a few. Um,
That's what I'm saying. I was gonna say maybe I can steal one more.
I would really, I would overemphasize that value of being at the intersection of lots of different ideas and circles of people. I think that's really served me well. Um, I've brought my best ideas when I'm exposed to people that are quite different to how I think. Um, Leaders in a completely different space. I was hanging out with a group of people in Austria that I was very lucky to be invited to hang around with, and speaking to the conductor of the Vienna Symphony Orchestra was so
Hmm.
fascinating, and hearing about how he prepares and how he thinks about being excellent in his role.
Yeah.
There's parallels to whatever you're doing, but also being able to think a little bit differently about what he's saying to you from your own experiences. I think is hugely valuable. I live overseas, and I've gotten a ton of utility out of that. Be, Exposure to different cultures,
Yeah.
bringing an American mindset to a European environment and vice versa when I'm back home, I found to be extremely valuable. So, um, yeah, I think that would probably be one that I would emphasize in terms of kind of broad.
The way that I look at it, especially when it comes to always being able to learn from someone else, right? And always being able to learn from people that are excelling in other area, like separate domains, right? To you as well, right? Like that's something that I think is important for everyone to kind of take home, right? When it's the athlete that you're looking at that maybe you look up to, or that there's different people that are excelling in different categories, and you're like, how do they prepare themselves? How dedicated are they? What do they do on a day-to-day basis, to get ready to excel, right? And then you have to replicate that if it and that's if that's what you want. And I feel like everyone should strive for excellence, right? And I feel like you probably feel the same way. Obviously some people want different lives and they want more, just calmer lives, and I can appreciate that as well. So if that's the route that some people want to take, all power to you. But we're obviously speaking to the people that are wanting to excel, that the people that want to go to that beyond to that next level. And I think having that advice where it's like you can find people in every category. I mean, iron sharpens iron for that reason, right? Like finding those people that you can surround yourself with, and even having your network to see exactly how they're approaching things, super valuable. And I think that's, unless you have something else to add. I was
The only thing I would add in is just the value of routine. I think it sounds like a lot of your listeners are also running businesses or running business units, and um,
exactly.
I have found, particularly when having to go through stressful points running this business, whether it be around redundancies, challenging things at work, having a routine, one, knowing where your red line is in terms of hours commitment. For me, I take morning exercise quite seriously, and if I can't make time for that, then I know I need to recalibrate. So knowing where your red line is, and then I think a adjacent to that is having the life habits that you can fall back on, that kind of create a foundation for when things do get tough and do get stressful. You can fall back on those routines and hit a level of stasis that allows you to push through difficult things, because it's not always easy. Markets ebb and flow. There's a lot of
That's
things
for
that are
sure.
outside of your a lot of things outside of your control. So if you have these habits that you can fall back on, routines in your day, I found for myself, it's helped me get through quite difficult stretches. And I think it's probably helpful for everyone.
Yeah, man, and I think that's the perfect note to end on. I appreciate you for coming on, Ryan. It's been great 30 minutes getting the chance to really hear you talk a little bit about your journey and what you guys are building over there at Public. Definitely sounds like something special. People are listening to this and they want to either reach out to you or someone from your team. What are the best ways to go and do that?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Also, check us out at public.io. Especially if you have an interest in that intersection of tech, innovation, and public sector, we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to include both of those links in the description. And if you guys did make it all the way to the end, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And make sure to go check out Ryan and the team. But we hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Ryan, for coming on. And ciao, ciao.
Cheers, Alessandro.